All right. Oh, Greg, you should come on camera or stop sharing your screen. Come on camera.
I don't know. I kind of like that, the image of me as the rocket ship.
There we go. There's no doubt about it. Whoa. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Greg, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. How the heck are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. It's a good day. I'm doing pretty well. I was sick for the last week, but I'm excited to get back to it with you.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you're from we're going to be getting into like Power BI control management, blah 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 blah. That's super great. Excited about that, and I'm excited to have every one of you who's tuned into this live stream. Thank you guys so much for dropping by. Great to have you here. But Greg has shared something with me that I thought we've got to delve a little deeper into this. Greg, can you tell me a little bit more about your living arrangements right now, your home? Because you have an activity I was not expecting you to say that's next after this live stream.
Yeah, so I live in central New Jersey. I actually live directly next door to my sister and my brother-in-law and my nieces and nephew, which is delightful. And together we operate a farm that I live on, a small 10-acre Christmas tree, goat, and chicken farm. And we're adding some crops this summer. So as soon as we're done with this live stream, I'm actually heading out back to feed the goats.
Hang on again. I've heard it now twice and I'm still rewinding. What state do you live in?
New Jersey, the Garden State.
Well, I know it's the Garden State, but I've seen reliable, like, I know it's like New Jersey is 99.9% city. I didn't know there were farms in New Jersey. Are you the only one? Are you the farm in New Jersey?
Surprisingly, on my road, if I go out my driveway, turn right, and just stay on that road, I pass at least 2 operating farms that have farm stands open to the public and acres of cropland.
Wow.
And then I hit a golf course, and then I hit one of those cities.
Okay, wow. And so, okay, that's amazing in and of itself. Like, if you had said to me, oh, I live in Nebraska or Oklahoma or something, like, oh, hey, that's great. I was talking with, I think, Phil Seamark, and he's like, oh, I live and we run a bee farm. Like, oh, that's great. He's out in nowhere. But you're in New Jersey, and you have a goat farm.
Yeah, hour from New York, hour and a half from Philly, goats.
Holy cow, that is incredible.
Cows soon, I hope.
Really?
Well, you said holy cow. I thought you were bringing it up. We do want to either trade out or add to the goats some miniature. Oh crap! I don't remember the breed that my sister wanted, but we're going to add some miniature cows.
That's
and
amazing.
When I say miniature, they're still 500 pounds.
Yeah,
they're large animals.
Yeah. Wow. How much land do you have? How many acres?
10 acres.
Okay. All right. Hey, and don't get me wrong, I am not Donald. I'm not knocking Nebraska. None of that, right? Like. That is great. I live in Wisconsin, for God's sake. Like, there are cows, like, literally, like, outside my door. I think there's 15 cows outside my door. Kid, there's not really that many cows in Wisconsin, for those of you who haven't been here. But, I completely get living in a rural state. So but I never expected New Jersey. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, well, all right. And Jack's got some comment about The Sopranos, so it's not all The Sopranos, Jack. All right.
No, we've only got a few cousins who work in construction, if you know what I mean.
Well, good deal. All right. So we are here. This is everyone's lunch break, and I really appreciate this. So, want to make sure that this is worth your time and worth your value. So before we jump into it, we're going to do our little customary little sip that we're going to do to get up and running. So let's go ahead and grab that and take a drink. Oh, come on now. All right. So, okay, Greg, why don't you give us just a little bit of background? Where have you come from? Like, how long have you just started working in Power BI? Is this something new to you? Uh, can you give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. So, in addition to being a professional farmer, I have spent a little bit of time working in the Power BI world. 2023 is actually a special year for me. It is my DAX decade. That should be coming up midsummer. I don't actually know the precise date, but I know it is over the summer that I've been working with DAX on a professional basis for a decade. I started off as the Excel monkey. I was just the data guy
Yeah.
for a forklift manufacturer. I moved into a consulting role pretty quickly thereafter, moved out, drove through your state
Oh.
I'd moved to Minnesota. I lived in Minneapolis for about a year and a half. Then I came back east. I lived in Philadelphia for quite a while, managing the data practice for a Microsoft partner, and then eventually broke off to be freelance and worked on my own, consulting with incredibly large and incredibly small customers and everyone in between. I did a brief little stint working with AWS in their consulting practice, leading a data team as well, and then moved back to the Microsoft world and have since been building Argus and working on both a little bit of consulting and operations management, operations monitoring for Power BI. So when it comes to Power BI, I've been around longer than it has. I've been doing this DAX thing for quite a while. I've been building data models large and small, and I've been helping customers and clients to do the same.
So one question I always like to ask when someone says, I've been working on data sets large and small, when you say large, how big are we actually talking?
So I'll answer you, but first I will give the answer I would give to a client when they start saying, we've got really large data, should we be concerned? And the answer I give them is always, unless you have 100 million rows of data in your largest fact tables, we're not talking about anything that is concerning either for me or for Power BI.
Yep.
The Vertipack engine is great, and I've had the luck to work with models much larger than that. I'd say the largest data model I've worked on was just over 10 billion records in several of its largest fact tables. And I've worked on a number of well over 100 gigabyte compressed tabular models.
Wow, see, now that is truly the bar. Once you start getting above that 100 gigabyte mark, that's when now you have to really start to engineer solutions, at least inside my experience, because the tabular engine is so powerful. If you're below that, there's a lot you can do to just kind of ram it through and just allow the engine to handle it. But now,
oh, for sure. Yeah. For a lot of customers, if you're coming from something that lived in Excel on a worksheet, not in Power Pivot, it almost doesn't matter what the data model is, and I hesitate to say that, but it's true. There are very few things you can do with Excel scale data that will make Power BI crawl. There are some, but you sort of have to try. Yep. And it's when you get to those big models, though, it's fun because it's not just a modeling problem. It's not just DAX. You also get into the limits of physics. If we're talking about refreshing a 100 gigabyte model, well, if you're lucky and you've got great hardware, you might have 100 gigabit network connections.
Right.
So you cannot possibly move all of that data in seconds. It just does not fit across the wire. And so when you start getting into some of the physical boundaries, in addition to what can the engine itself handle, that's where you get to fun engineering challenges.
I cannot agree more. Especially, I've always liked to think of it as mass, right? Like you've got this huge mass of data. How are you going to possibly manage that in a DevOps pipeline, right? Like for CI/CD and data ops, managing that data in those states can be a big challenge at a lot of companies. But now we're really starting to get into operations, and I think that's where like you've really started to like say, hey, this is something I know quite a bit about, and that's where Argus that's where you brought Argus in, right?
Yeah. So I've had, like I said, the privilege, the luck of working on in extremely large environments, and I've seen what it can do to have access to an operations team who can tell you exactly what's going on and who can work with you when you have these large physical challenges, these massive challenges, as you said, in addition to just technical challenges, and making things work in those large environments. And the central thesis of Argus is, we build incredible things for other people as BI professionals. Everything we build is for someone else's use. we deserve nice things too. And Argus is here to help fill that need, to simplify operations for Power BI professionals.
Well, that is fantastic because and I hope Microsoft is soon going to be overcoming this challenge, or in some ways. But I think we've all been through the challenge and the pain of, okay, this doesn't work. What? How do I manage this? How do I leverage these? Oh, what the heck is an API? I use databases. What am I going to do with this? And that's where Argus comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Um, so I guess where would be the best place to start going into how Argus fits in as a solution for companies?
Sure. So before we get into Argus or our solution, I really
Mm-hmm.
just want to frame the conversation around operations. I've said that a few times. I will say it probably far too many times in the remainder of our conversation, but it's an important question, and it's one that I have not seen a lot of discussion about. There certainly is some, but I've not seen a lot of discussion in the Power BI world, and even in the larger BI world. It's usually not front and center, but it's something that I think is really worth talking about. So I'll actually pull up just a bare minimum of a couple of slides, and I promise one of them is a picture. So hopefully no one gets too concerned about that. I'll share my screen here,
All
and
right.
we can talk about what operations is before we get into what Argus does. So I've shared my screen, and y'all should be able to see a rocket ship.
We're good to go.
And I've got this because I think that there's a lot of similarity between what people show up for when it comes to space travel and what people show up for when it comes to software. So people like the launch day. People show up. People will go to Cape Canaveral and watch the shuttle take off and watch spaceships launch. And people get really excited in software. We've built a new application. We've built a new incredible report that we want to publish out to the organization. And we get really concerned about launch day. And we click that publish button. And that's what gets the fanfare. People have timelines around launching. People have timelines around delivering features. There's that classic countdown, T minus 10, 9, 8. And there's a minus for a reason, because that's what happens before launch. When you get to 0, that is launch time. That's when we click publish in Power BI, or when we create the workspace app. But then there's a count that continues until the end of the mission. T plus 1 is the first second after liftoff has finished. And similarly, when we publish something in Power BI, when we create an application, when we make software, we launch. But the software is just starting. It's not done. Development, or the primary development phase, may be done or coming to some sort of conclusion, but there's still so much more to do after launch. And the value of software and I promise I'll drop the metaphor after this, but the value of the space mission happens after launch. There is no value leading up to it. There's plenty of hard work. There's incredible work that goes into it. And I don't want to devalue the work, but the reason that we launch something into space and the reason that we publish or create software applications is to get what comes after. And that's where operations comes in, making sure that we get and continue to get what comes after launch.
And honestly, I absolutely love that expression, because that's something that I talk about on a very regular basis. Like, all of this work that we do to engineer a solution has no value if it's not accessible, consumable, and used by people to make business decisions, right? And this is wonderful. I like this analogy. This is great.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's something that I would love to be able to say that I have known all along, but I've spent most of my career focusing on how do we do DAX better?
Yeah.
And I'd say if anyone knows me for anything, it's probably either talking about models or talking about DAX. But that's all pre-launch.
Wait, models? Oh, data models. Okay.
Data models. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I agree. That, holy cow, me and you we might have to make this a regular thing, right?
Yeah,
awesome.
And so, go ahead.
No, I was just saying this is fantastic.
Yeah. So I've talked about what launch is and what we want to do after launch. And so this is just a brief overview of some of the things that we traditionally are concerned about in systems administration or in operating software solutions. And everyone's fully capable of reading, but it's primarily tracking compute resources and the availability of those things, making sure that the lights stay on. That's the core of operations. But there's also, in addition to is the thing on, is it alive, is what's coming out of it. This thing that is alive, that has been launched, what's going on? And are we getting what we were promised? Is it doing the right things? And I think this is.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think this is something.
I thought
Yeah.
that was yeah. Is it doing the right things? I
Yes.
really like that question.
Yeah, and there's a lot behind these questions.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that has come up from Microsoft, from Google, from Amazon, from all of the cloud providers, anyone who's offering software as a service sells you, in addition to that software as a service, they sell you the story that by buying some SaaS product, you can ignore operations, that the SaaS product is operations free, or at least the operations that need to occur are things that the SaaS vendor will do for you. And that's the story. I see you making some faces there. Have you had some experience, Chris, with being sold a story?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, it just works, and often it does just work. Uh, I think there are challenges. Sometimes it doesn't just work, and when it doesn't just work, well, where are my levers to fix it? How do I know something is wrong? Right? Like clearly the report isn't up. Clearly it's not refreshing. But why? What's causing it? How can I understand what's going on? Where do I go to access? Like, how do I figure any of that stuff out when I'm using software as a service and it's supposed to just work? Right?
Yeah. And that's the promise is, we give you this canvas to paint upon, and we give you the paint. All you have to do is paint and the picture will be there. And that is a very nice story. And I don't mean to deride any SaaS vendor, because there is an incredible amount of work that goes into it. It is building software products and selling them. And like I said, I don't want to devalue the work that goes into building things. But I would like to focus on what Power BI actually gives us when we buy Power BI, when we're buying the Power BI service. And I will focus on the Power BI service, not on Report Server, because the vast majority of Power BI surface area is on the service.
Yeah.
And when we buy the service, regardless of if we're buying Pro or buying Premium or any of the various SKUs, what we get is high availability. Microsoft promises that your reports will be up, and it does not matter which specific server Microsoft owns that is hosting your report today, or if it's a different server that Microsoft owns that's hosting your report tomorrow. It will be there. When you go to that report, it exists. And if the servers go down, you can still get to your report because they're handling that on the back end. They give you a fully managed infrastructure. Those servers that I just mentioned, we actually do not have to care about the servers themselves. If we buy Premium, we do have to care about some compute resources, but we do have effectively unlimited RAM and storage, whether on Premium or on Pro. Storage, absolutely. As you make workspaces, you get more storage assigned. I've never seen a client or heard a client get any storage limitation enforced upon them by Microsoft.
Yeah.
And for
honestly,
RAM,
Greg,
yeah.
I think that's an amazing point when we talk about the Power BI service versus like running analysis or like SSAS in an on-prem or even in a VM, right? You have finite amounts of memory that you manage the models that are deployed to it. And if you deploy 100 models onto that, a 200 gig, server that you have, well, they have better average less than a gig each because they won't have any resources, right? So and that's not the case in Power BI, right?
Yeah, we get effectively unlimited RAM. There are limits per data set for Pro and for Premium for how large a single data set can be, but there are effectively no enforced limits for how many copies of that data set you can make or how many other data sets you can have. So the RAM is very nearly unlimited. And Microsoft is managing that on the back end. It is entirely possible that you could that Microsoft could have some server that is overloaded because someone has a data set that just ballooned in size but is still within the limits, and that might cause issues. I'm sure it does. Microsoft definitely has an operations team for Power BI, but when that sort of thing happens, when those two data sets bump into each other, Microsoft, because it is a fully managed infrastructure, will shift things around, will make sure that the refresh happens to the best of their ability for your schedule. When you request when you request a refresh via the API, you can ask for a certain number of retries as well. So this sort of stuff happens behind the scenes for us, and that's incredible. I do not mean to deride or devalue any software as a service product.
No, and I'm not either. Yeah. I've talked with the people who like run and manage that stuff. The amount of caffeine that must be pumping through their veins 24/7 to keep the. I don't know what the number was, but when they said the number of things, and like I saw some sort of like report that they had, but it was like trillions of refreshes and trillions of data sets, and like the number was boggling when you think about all of these things running, and like the number of Excel files that they're connecting to, like the crappiest and worst things you could possibly imagine to connect to. They've got billions of those things that are on their list that they're monitoring and managing, and holy cow, the fact that it runs at all is like a miracle of engineering and hard work. So I'm on board. It's incredible.
I'd love to share one of my favorite factoids I've ever heard. I heard this at one of the Power Platform World Tour events years ago, and it was that one of the KPIs for Azure as a whole, so the vice president at Microsoft who oversees all of Azure, one of the KPIs, one of the reports he got daily, and I don't know if it was a Power BI report, was for the amount of concrete poured for data centers the prior day. What? Because that's the scale they're operating on. When we're talking about making sure there's enough RAM and and enough CPU available for certain things to happen in Power BI, making sure that these data sets have space to run, that there are billions of software activities happening per day, or trillions of these things. That's what when we talk about software, when we talk about any sort of infrastructure, we're really usually considering that sort of thing. But when Microsoft is talking about infrastructure for Azure, on a certain level, they are talking about real estate. How much concrete did we pour for the data centers that will be opened in 2 years to handle the demand that we expect to have in those 2 years? Not how fast can we rack and stack servers? How fast can we build buildings to put those servers into? It's one of my favorite factoids in any domain.
That is unbelievably amazing. Especially for an operations guy. So, yeah, that's fantastic.
But even with all of that scale, with the teams of people, not just individuals, but whole teams dedicated to this, when we look at Power BI and we look at software as a service, well, Power BI has given us a lot of things, and they are incredible. But if we look at the traditional operational concerns for software solutions, and Power BI is a software solution. It may be billed as a low-code environment. I would debate that, but it is a software solution at the end of the day. And when we look at these traditional concerns, the things that we get for it being software as a service are not really covering everything that we care about from an operational perspective. And again, rather than read slides to you, I think the best thing I can do is jump into demo, but also open it up for questions from anyone in the audience and also from you, Chris, given this grounding in what we care about for operations.
Yeah, and I think this, you're exactly right? Like there's tons of things that it gives us, but there is a gap. I guess I'm going to like a little bit push back on you around backups and disaster recovery. You don't think that the Power BI service has backups and recovery as part of it?
They do.
Okay. All right.
But their backup and recovery is not your backup and recovery.
All right. Fair enough.
So let's say that you have a data set and it's published out there, and something goes wrong for your source system. And if that's something that went wrong was truly terrible, maybe you cannot refresh that data again.
Yeah.
And you want yesterday's version of that data set. You want the thing that was refreshed at 7 a.m. on the 4th of April, not on the 5th of April. Can you get that from Power BI? If it's been refreshed already?
Technically, if you use data flows, you can go to the previous Parquet or the CDM file that's in there. But you're right.
Yep. But the data set itself, the PBIX,
the availability to go in and do that is exorbitantly difficult. So much so that you could might as well say it doesn't exist, right? Because it's not.
Yeah, Microsoft might be able to do it, but they don't offer it to you. So if you want yesterday's PBIX, you cannot get that unless you have yesterday's PBIX somewhere other than the Power BI service.
Yep, I would completely agree. Yep.
And when we're talking disaster recovery, again, Microsoft will make sure that the Power BI stuff stays online. But say you have that thing that happened, source system went down, and it's going to take 2 days to get the database back up. But you need these reports today.
Yeah.
You can't get those reports back up today. You can refresh them in 2 days after the source database is back up.
Yep.
But DR is entirely driven by your recovery time and your latency. So how quickly can you recover, and at what point in time can you recover to? And with Power BI, you get no levers to pull on either of those. You can't say when you get your PBIX back, when you get your report back. Microsoft, if a server goes down, no one blinks. But if you have a problem, their DR is not your DR.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
and I was going to say that the other thing that they don't have, but maybe you cover this in life cycle, is, or maybe you're talking about that in disaster recovery, but I've always been challenged with the no rollback capabilities, right? You deploy changes and you don't like them, right? Like someone says your numbers are all wonky. There's no way to roll it back. And there's no way to validate preload if the data is right, so those are some of my biggest challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. The refresh mechanism in Power BI is actually really incredible. It refreshes all of the data that it needs to. You've got 2 copies, and only when one is fully there, it swaps them so that you always have your queries being answered. But you're right. You can't do anything with that new copy that's being hydrated during a refresh.
Yep. Yeah. You can't test it to make sure it's right, or like go back and say, oh, the account table is jacked. Use the previous one, right? Oh my God, that'd be awesome. Okay, sorry. Continue on. Go on.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that we mean to address with Argus, and being able to say what exists, what's out there, what's happening in your Power BI tenant, and being able to answer these questions natively within Power BI. And so I've popped over to a demo that we've got for Argus, and this is showing some of the data and some of the information that we capture on behalf of our customers and present back to those customers so that they can monitor what's going on in the tenant. And the first thing is what's going on. That's one of the core pieces of operations. What is happening in my tenant? And so what we're looking at here is a refresh monitoring report. And this allows us to see every refresh that happens across the entire tenant. You can't get this in Power BI.
No.
You can get the refresh history for a single data set. And you can see what that data set did. You can also see refreshes that have occurred on premium capacities, but you can't see every refresh in any place in Power BI. And so what we've got is every refresh.
So how are you doing this? How did you possibly come up with this?
Yeah, so this is all based on Microsoft's APIs for Power BI. What we do is after a one-time configuration, we then go through and hit those APIs for your tenant. And we'll hit them to collect all of the data here, and actually more. We're still actively developing some reports. So we've got more data on the back end than we've got reports for on the front end yet. But we're capturing it because we know it's valuable. But we're scraping all of those APIs, and we're hitting them within all of the rate limits that exist. We're hitting them with the fullest parameters possible so that we're getting as much data as possible from the APIs. And then we're persisting that data so that we can go back much farther than what Power BI will allow you to do. For example, we're looking at refresh history for 60 days here. The refresh history within the Power BI service is up to 7 days or 60 refreshes. And that is what they will actually store. And so if you go to a data set and look at the refresh history, you'll see up to 7 days of refresh history. We've got 60 days right here.
That's fantastic. But I think you said something there I would like to delve into. You said up to the API limits. Now, I've worked in large companies where we've had tens of thousands of data sets with tens of thousands of refreshes going on. That's been a real challenge with the API calls to be able to get this stuff back within a reasonable, within the API limits. How do you manage that?
Yeah. So in addition to what you're seeing here, there is it's an iceberg. So you're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and there is large infrastructure behind the scenes that does all of the workload management, all of the API interactions to get this data and then persist it into the back end for Argus. And so what we've done is we've built a pretty robust job management infrastructure where every API call we need to do is a job on our back end.
Okay.
And we will retry those. We will respect all rate limits Microsoft publishes so that we can hit all of those APIs as frequently as possible, but no more so, and then collect all of this data. So for a very large customer, we won't have an initial load done for potentially more than a day. But for most customers we've seen, even into thousands of workspaces and concurrent, and the scale that goes along with that number of workspaces in terms of number of data sets, more than thousands, and number of reports, more than thousands.
Okay.
That can be loaded in the course of an hour or a couple of hours.
Wow, that is fantastic. So what I'm hearing you say is that you've taken all the APIs, you've written all the code to extract all the data, you've written all the code to manage all the data, you've written all the storage layers, and then you bring to us actionable insights on on this front end page. Is that?
Yep. Yeah, we capture all of that data and we persist it for you. And then we present these reports to you. And so we can quickly see things that we might care about in terms of what's happening. So these are all of the refreshes. We can see the chart in the middle, shows you the total number of refreshes and the average duration by day. But this is one thing that's useful. If the total number of refreshes spikes or dips, that might be a problem. But what we really care about when we're talking about refreshes is failures. And so do we have something that is concerning? And we've got a few things that are concerning here that I can tell you right off the bat. There are a couple of one-offs. We can see this US sales analysis only failed once. We can see Star Trek only failed once. Demo clients give us the ability to have some fanciful names. But we can see this offsets thing failed a couple of times and then failed 4 more times in a row. And fun fact, have you ever had, Chris, a data set whose schedule turned off for refreshing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know why that happened?
Well, because you hit what's the limit? It's like 6 failures and then it turns off, or no?
4 in a row.
4 in a row? Okay.
Yeah. So I got some emails. As I mentioned, I was actually sick the last few days. This is a demo thing that I've got. It runs on a gateway that runs on a VM that turns off at night. And so I was not online for a few days. And you can see these failures on the 31st, the 1st, the 2nd, and then the 3rd. And I was like, I actually was out, but this is a thing that could really happen. Out for a few days. There were some failure notifications, but I didn't see any today. And so I probably wouldn't go and check on this data set. And just something went wrong last week. And I'm not going to look at this until someone comes to me and complains that this data set seems to be stale.
Right.
And when they make that complaint, then I'll go in and look, and I'll look at the refreshes, and I'll try refreshing it myself. I'll do a manual one, and it'll succeed because my VM's on and the gateway's up. And so it'll succeed now, but
but if you don't restart the schedule, it won't start back up again. Oh, yeah, that's a big gap.
So 4 in a row failures on scheduled refreshes, turn off your refresh.
Well, and so Jack Irby's asking a question. Does this work just on Premium and PPU? What about Pro? Will this work for Pro too?
Yeah, this is there are no limitations for anything that we're going to see today or in the Argus product with regard to premium capacity versus pro. Um, this is available for any Power BI customer. The API data is there, and we don't draw those lines, even though Microsoft does. Their product makes sense to have a premium tier.
Mm.
For us, we collect this data. We don't care what the workspace lives on. We don't care if that's a premium capacity or not. The API is the same to see the refresh history.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes good sense.
Um,
So you're not
yeah.
using
So
the XMLA endpoint at all in here. It's just the APIs.
correct. This is
Okay.
all API driven. We've got some future goals to
Mm-hmm.
probably hit the XMLA endpoint um, for premium customers
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do some more things that might be useful, such as track data set size. But that's we don't have that yet. Everything we're doing right now is API driven, so it's available for all customers.
Wow, this is
Yeah.
this is fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
okay, so this occurs. You can see this in here. Do you by any chance have an alerting mechanism to alert yourself to these?
So we don't have alerting built in yet, but that
Okay.
is something that we're actively working on. But
Okay.
one thing that we can do, if we've got
Mhm.
this failed workspace, what we can do is actually navigate directly to that.
What is that?
So this is there we go. I'm spanning two tenants right now, so I've got to go to another browser profile. But if you click on that and you're logged into your own tenant, it'll actually take you directly to that data set. So I saw that there were failures for this offsets data set. And I can come here directly to my tenant where this data set is, and I can look at its scheduled refresh, see what's going on there,
Wow.
and it's off. I could see the refresh history here in the UI. And if you wanted to do this without something that's aggregating your refreshes, this is the thing that you would have to do. You'd have to go to an individual data set and take a look at this. And what we see here is, as I said, the VM that I use, that gateway is down because the VM was down because I was sick for a few days.
Wow. So right from within the report, you can still take. It doesn't alert you, but you can take action because that's a hyperlink to the exact data set.
Yep, because when we call the APIs to get refresh history, we get the data set that it belongs to. And when we call the APIs and you'll see the data for it later on for the data lineage, we get everything about that data set. We know what workspace it lives in, we know what its name is, and we know what the data set GUID is. And if you look at these URLs, to go to the data set page, it's app.powerbi.com/groups. That's the same no matter what. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you're logged in. Then it's a GUID for the workspace. Then it's data sets. Then it's a GUID for the data set. And so we have those GUIDs because we're calling the APIs to get all of the lineage data that we'll look at in a minute. And then that's available here. And we can construct this URL with those pieces. And then you click on it and you go there. So the idea of having actionable reports, something happened and I want to take action on it. Go right to it. Take those actions. Do more.
Wow. I mean, that's something that, honestly, if you're watching this channel, you should always be striving to make your reports actionable, right? Good looking reports, nice. Maybe people get insights from, but if they can take an action and do something with it, that's even better. What other actions does Argus allow me to take when it comes to managing my Power BI service?
So right now, the actions available within the reports are just hyperlinks to the objects, but everything that we've got where it's reasonable, it is a link directly to that object, either in your tenant or later on we'll look at users. It'll take you directly to Active Directory objects so that you can inspect individuals as well.
Well, that is big in and of itself.
Yeah. So I'll jump on to the next report page here. And this is, again, answering the question of what's going on, what is happening. And so this is user activity. And what we're looking at here, by default, this will show report views. And you can get the usage metrics in Power BI built right in, and you can get all of the report views for a given published report. And if you clear some filters, you can get all of the report views for a whole workspace. This is across the entire tenant. So we're hitting the user activity log APIs, and we're getting all views. And again, this is a demo tenant, so this one is fairly low in report views. But we can see who's accessed and when certain reports. The activity was viewing a report, the report name, the data set associated with that report, the workspace that it lives in, if it's on a premium capacity, where is it? So what are people hitting? And then also details that are reported by their browser. So the location they are, well, if you're on a VPN, your IP is not necessarily going to tell you where you are geographically,
Right.
but at least the IP and the browser agent. So this is, again, across the entire tenant, and we can filter anything down. Every single report page that we're showing has the ability to filter down to workspaces. So we can select just a couple of workspaces, but we can go farther than that. We could say that we've got a specific data set that we care about. And so now I'm viewing all report views for any report downstream of this selected data set.
Oh, wow.
Because again, we've got that lineage. This is saying this data set drives this many views, and it's through however many reports are downstream.
So you've gone that route, and you know the reports that they were connecting to. So you can manage impact analysis of any changes that you've got coming in.
Yeah, and when you speak of changes, that is, I wish I could have said that I planned the segue. In addition to report views, we also have every single other activity that is tracked through the activity logs. So report views are something that, like I said, you can get a different view of through Power BI. This is every activity that occurs. And so if we're talking changes, let's look at who are the users who are making things, who are our creators, our authors in Power BI. So I've just selected in this activity everything that is a create activity. So then these are the individuals who are doing create operations. And we can see what they're creating. Someone created a data set. Someone created a report right here. The report is named IP. The data set is named IP. And it was done in, oh, look at that, a familiar name, Greg Dev. That's my development workspace. And so I created that report. I also, and you'll see nearly at the exact same time, we've got these two rows. I also created the data set. That was me clicking publish in Power BI desktop. And what we can see is they've got the same shared timestamp. A report creation and a data set creation happened at the same time.
Okay.
And if we're looking at who's doing things beyond individual data sets, so someone created a data mart, someone created a gateway. So let's look at who's actually standing things up. And a couple of people have created some gateways. Now, gateways are not linked directly to a single report or data set or workspace. So those are blanked out here, but we can see what they created and when they created it.
Wow. This is amazing. So you'll have all of the activities that are captured by the APIs, right? So if there's something that's not captured, like create a scorecard, that's not something that you're going to have, right?
I do not believe those are coming through the API yet. I expect it will at some point. They're or they're just out of GA, so they're probably going to hit the
MVP,
APIs
right?
eventually.
Like, yes. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Understandable. You have to be in that range, right? So.
Yeah. But I do also want to show off one other thing. So like I said, there's a one-time configuration. I'm selecting this user who has a GUID for a name. And in the configuration, what you do is we need an app registration to call the APIs. And that's a one-time thing that happens on your side that you'd stand up in your tenant and then give us permissions to use. And then we can call the APIs on your behalf. But you can also use Argus to audit Argus. So this is everything that's being done by the app registration that is the Argus backend. So these are all of the API calls that we're hitting. And export activity events is the thing that created this report page. That's the API. And so you can, we don't hide anything. Everything's open. It's your data. We're just managing it, a piece of it for you and presenting it to you. So this is us. If you want to check what we're doing, here's everything that we've done in this tenant.
Okay. And now, does the data actually live inside your tenant, or is it in the client's tenant?
Yep. So right now, everything is going to be on Argus managed Azure infrastructure. So all of the data gets stored into Azure Blob Storage, and that's Azure Blob Storage in Azure in the Argus Azure tenant. We are working on bring your own storage, where you'd be able to give us the path to your own storage account and container for Argus. It's something that actually surprisingly few customers have asked us about. I know that for some customers, it is an absolutely make or break thing, but for those we've worked with so far, it hasn't been a big deal, so it hasn't been prioritized yet.
Okay.
But since it is Azure Blob Storage, it doesn't make a huge difference if it's our blob or if it's your blob. Right now, it's just a matter of putting together the configuration to allow customers to bring their own storage. So right now, it's all on Argus backend, and these reports are then hosted on the Argus Power BI tenant, and then we share them with you with Azure B2B sharing, so that once you do that initial configuration, everything is turnkey from there. You don't have to worry about managing backend storage. You don't have to worry about updating these PBIX reports or keeping in sync with our backend changes. You just go to this link, you see your data here, and only your data, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And you're logged in, so anything you click on will navigate you into your own Power BI tenant. Bring your own tenant, so hosting the reports themselves on your own tenant is something that is farther out. The bring your own storage is the thing that is sort of next on our roadmap for user configurations.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And you just have the metadata of reports. So, like, you have like workspace name, report name, user email address. It's not like you're gathering like the data itself that's in Power BI. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't see any rows of data that you have. We see the name of the report. We see the name of the data set, the name of the workspace, the name of the user. Technically, it is the UPN, so it might not be their email, but it almost always is. But we see those things. We don't see any rows of data in your data set. We do see table and column details. So we see table name, column name, that sort of thing, but we don't see the rows in those. So we can tell you how many tables exist in a data set. We can tell you how many columns exist in the data set. But we can't tell you what rows are in there. We can't see any of that data. And you'll actually see that reflected in this activity log right now. This is the user principal that is calling the APIs for Argus. And you can see that we export activity events. That's this page. This is report views, other activities in the tenant. We get modified workspaces. This is part of the scanner API workflow. We get refreshables, which tells us refreshables for premium capacities. We get workspaces info. That's again part of the scanner API. And we get workspaces info results, also part of the scanner API workflow. And so these are what we're hitting. There are actually some APIs that don't get reflected in the activity log. We have not excluded these. Microsoft simply does not include them. So if you get the refresh history for an individual data set, that is an API we call. But that get refresh history is not reflected in this activity. But if we were to access the reports, this user never views a report. This user cannot ever edit a data set or anything like that. So we never get access to that underlying data.
Okay, that makes sense. Awesome. So I think the big thing that's been kind of looming out there for a little while, because this is something I'm very passionate about or interested in. You have a third tab here about data lineage.
I do.
And I would like to talk about that or see what you have. Okay, look at this.
I'll show one page and then see if that answers some of your questions. And you can also ask any that you've got. Before jumping into this, though, I do see a question in the chat. And Kevin, thanks for dropping the link to arguspbi.com. But the question was, how is this licensed? And do we need to give you access to our tenant? So I think the discussion just a moment ago answers to the access to tenant. This is a monthly subscription. You can see our pricing and our features on the main page, but everything that you're seeing is included in Argus, regardless of which SKU level that you buy from us. And all of our various SKUs offer, as I said, all of this data that we're looking at, as well as being across premium and pro licenses. So you can get any Argus regardless of how you buy Power BI. So the way that you buy Power BI does not affect the way that you buy Argus.
Fantastic. Jack, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and so what we're looking at here is, as you said earlier, Chris, sometimes reports don't have to be the prettiest if they can do something useful. And this is actually one of my favorite reports, despite the fact that it is just a bunch of matrix viz and a couple slicers. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to track the lineage across all of these things. So what we see are the primary objects that can exist in Power BI. A data source, that's something that's configured in a data set. Data sets, those hold the data and are the things that serve the reports. Reports and dashboards, how users interact with the data, and then the users themselves. And what we've done is we've navigated the hierarchy essentially that these things all form. And it's not a natural hierarchy. It's actually really more of a graph data structure, but we don't need to get into the weeds of how this is captured on the back end. But what we've done is we've made sure that you can navigate all of the linkages between these. So I can, for example, scroll through and find data source of interest, perhaps something that we know holds sensitive information. Perhaps it's, finance data or something like that. I'll select a data set on the left-hand side here. All I've done is click on one row with a data set by its name. And what I see is every single data set that touches that data source. So this data source appears in these data sets. So rows of data that exist in this source appear in the rows of data in these data sets somehow. Those rows of data are visible to our users via these reports. This particular source appears in no dashboards, but it appears in these 4 reports. And downstream of all of that, these are the Azure Active Directory users and groups that have access to these reports and these data sets, which means these people can see rows of data from this source.
So, is that list of people, all of the people that are in that AD group, or would I have to actually audit that AD group to see who's in that AD group?
Great question. You would have to go to that AD group. And so what we do is actually we capture, again, everything is well defined here. So if you click on that link, and again, I just have to switch browsers because I'm in 2 different tenants right now. If you click there, it will take you directly to this group.
Oh, so you can go in and see all that stuff. Okay.
Yep. So right now we are not hitting Active Directory APIs. That is another roadmap item. That one is actually where we've heard a lot of pushback. Most customers don't want us hitting Azure AD APIs on their behalf. So we're working on, because as soon as you start giving permissions to Azure AD, that is much closer to the root of security than hitting APIs for Power BI. So there's been some sensitivity around that. We're working on what the best way is if we can get an acceptably minimal permission set to hit the APIs, or if we can give you a really simple script to run and you give us a dump of that on a regular basis, and we'll use that to navigate the group hierarchy. So right now we just show the groups. It's a great question, or the users if there are users with named access. But you can, like I just showed, jump directly to that group to see its membership.
Oh, that's fascinating. I like this a lot.
And we can go the other way too.
I was just gonna say, can I go the other way? Can I start with, okay, what is everything that Greg can see?
Yep. Well, I didn't click on my own name, but I can do that.
Or
that Greg fella, he seems pretty suspicious. So I've selected
Greg.
Greg.
Shady guy. His eyes are shifted on me all the time.
Yep. So Greg can see all of these different reports. Greg can see these dashboards. And Greg's permissions that give him these reports and these dashboards mean that he can see these data sets because these data sets serve those reports and dashboards. Further, we know the relationships between data sources and data sets. So Greg can see data from all of these sources. Should Greg have permissions to this SQL server? I don't know, but he does.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now you can go through and actually revoke things. Like, okay, hey, Greg has access to my SQL server. Greg hasn't been on my team in 8 years. Why the hell does Greg still have access to it? I didn't even know that was a thing. Oh.
And I may not have a credential that allows me to log into SQL Server, but this is Power BI. There's a credential configured for the refresh. So the fact that this SQL Server is included in one of these data sets means that I can see rows from that SQL Server, that database, even if I have no credential to it. You may have revoked my SQL Server credential when I left your team, but I still have access to a report somewhere in here. That means I'm seeing rows of data from there.
That is so fascinating. How about does this and
Well,
apologies if it
I
doesn't. What's that?
if I could do one thing before you ask your question.
Sure, sure, sure.
So these are Power BI Viz. I can
Yeah.
hold down my control key and I can click on that SQL server in question.
Uh-huh.
So this is Greg selected over on the far right. Control click to also filter on that database that we care about. Here's how I have access to that database.
So all you have to do is go into that one data set, revoke
Mm-hmm.
access, and Greg out.
Yep.
Is
Sorry
that
for
by any
interrupting.
chance
What
a
was your
link
question?
right there? Is that a link that I could just click on that demos?
This one is not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that will be pretty shortly then. 'Cause it's supposed, we want it to be. I don't know why we don't have that right now. It's a great question, but this one is not yet a hyperlink. It will be shortly
Okay. All right. Sorry.
after I feed the goats. I think
Yeah.
that might be the next task.
All right. All right. All right. I mean, frankly, this takes on a number of different challenges that I've struggled with to work my way through over the years. So I'm excited to see these things. The question I was going to ask was, what about data flows? Do you capture anything on data flows? Can you see what the sources are for the data flows, or is that a black box for you?
The data flows are not included in the scanner API to the
Ah,
same degree that data
okay.
sets are.
All right.
So that is, we're going to hit data flows soon because our refresh history is also data sets.
Okay.
So fun fact, Microsoft does not consider a data flow a refreshable, nor does a data flow have a refresh history. It has a transaction history. And the only difference between a transaction and a refresh is that a data flow has a transaction and a data set has a refresh.
Oh my
And how they're
gosh.
spelled. So it's a different API. It's on our hit list. That
Okay.
will actually be very easy to add in here. Like I said, most of Argus is actually the backend. So adding a new API is not a lot of work. That's one that we'll be bringing in, but it doesn't. Data flows are different enough that they aren't included in the stuff we're already hitting, and we
Okay.
were hitting what we identified as sort of the core artifacts,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're hitting the rest. Every sprint.
No, and that makes complete sense. And when the second I thought I knew that data flows weren't involved. I thought you were going to say no, I can't because Microsoft doesn't have it. I didn't even know you could find a way. So that's exciting to hear that there is a path. And the second you said it was on the transaction side, I went, oh, it's because we're inheriting from the Power App now, the Power App data flow. So we're using transaction app verbiage versus data verbiage.
Yeah.
So,
okay. And I don't know everything that's in there, but it's, we'll bring in everything we can for data flows.
Oh, okay. All right. This is fantastic. Greg, why don't we go back to like our split screen? So let's just, because we're nearing the end of time here. So I just wanted to thank you so very much for showing us Argus. Where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so Kevin dropped the Argus PBI link in the chat on YouTube, and that is the best way to get in touch. If you go to arguspbi.com, you'll see we've got a contact us link, I think, on every single page. You can also reach out to me directly, greg@arguspbi.com, and I'll put that into the YouTube chat as well.
Awesome.
You can reach out directly. You can go through our contact form on the webpage. I'm also on I guess the term is very online. I'm on a lot of places. My username is usually GregEB. You can find me.
All right. Awesome. Well, Greg, thank you so very much for taking time to join us today. We really appreciate that. And thank you for everyone who has dialed into this session. Oh my gosh. Huge news. Holy cow. I hope you're paying attention. Next week, it's not necessarily live because I had to pre-record this interview with the Nets. We went through and we talked about what does working in the data field mean with all of the changes that are coming out with ChatGPT, with the advances of technology. What the heck is going to go on? This is a pre-recorded but live chat, live feed conversation next Wednesday noon. So please dial in and join us. Okay. So, oh my gosh, I almost forgot. This was huge. This
I'm
is
definitely
months,
excited about that one.
yeah, months in the making. So, Amir, thank you very much for that. For those of you who are joining us, thank you for dialing in. Greg, thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate having you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the time. I appreciate everyone who joined in with us.
Awesome. Well, everyone, you guys have a fantastic day. Try to, get out there, help each other out with these things. If you're interested in the solution, contact Greg, hit him up. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm supposed to do that, I guess. That feeds the logarithm per every YouTube guy out there. But everybody, have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Baker Tilly Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.